Just days ago, I made my case that 2018 may well have been anime's best year ever. But even in the best of times, we can never forget that anime is fundamentally a mistake, a blasphemy against Haruhi-sama herself that can never be forgiven. And so, as penance for enjoying the heights that anime reached this year, it is my solemn duty as your anime pope to examine the blackened depths to which it sunk as well. All so that I may warn you, the anime faithful, of the many sins wrought by your fellow man-child. What you are about to see is not for the faint of heart. If you came here expecting to see me take easy potshots at Darling in the Franxx or Goblin Slayer, well, that's perfectly understandable, considering that I probably put at least one of them in the thumbnail because they're more recognizable than any of the shows I'm actually talking about, but you are wrong. And I envy your naivete, for you know not what evil truly lurks in this world. In a few seconds, you will be staring into anime's abyss, and not the fun one where children bleed from their faces when they try to go uphill. No, this is a place of true suffering, of incest, incels, and insults to everything you hold dear, of animation so rough it makes the quality car chase look like Sakuga, and anime so bad that Master of Ragnarok didn't even make the list. I'm sparing you some pain by only looking at full-length series instead of the terrible short ones that came out this year, but consider yourselves forewarned. Starting us off at number 5, we've got Hakyu, Hoshin, Engi, a complete 23-episode-long adaptation of a 23-volume-long Shonen Jump manga. And well, you don't exactly have to be a math whiz to see where the problem is there. Moving at a pace of about one episode's worth of content per 3 minutes of screen time, watching this show feels a lot like having a seizure. Locations change every minute or so, with the longest pause between lines of dialogue being around 8 seconds. Characters will go from traveling to bantering to trying to kill each other in the blink of an eye, with most fights lasting somewhere in the 20-second range and everybody stopping to explain how wonderful and tactical they were after the fact. Hakyu Hoshin Engi tells the story of Tai Kobo, a doshi sent from Konron to the human world to find and defeat 365 Senyo and seal them away in Shinkai, the realm of the gods, as part of the Hoshin project. And if you know what any of that means, please tell me, because this show likes to rattle off undefined fantasy terms even faster than I just did. In just the first episode, our hero tells us his backstory, sets out on his quest, does battle with his main rival, infiltrates the enemy castle, forms an alliance with an enemy general, gets caught and betrayed by a mind-controlled former ally, sees the survivors of his destroyed homeland massacred, has a mental breakdown at the horror of everything he's just witnessed, and then gets better and goes fishing. Look, there's no right length for an adaptation of a long-form work like this, and you're going to have to make compromises no matter what you do. Pacing is subjective, and what's right for one person can feel glacially slow for another. But I think it's safe to say that Hakyu Hoshin Engi's approach to its material just doesn't work for anyone. The speed at which it presents its dialogue and action scenes isn't without precedent. Plenty of short-form comedy shows work at a similar pace, but stretched out over 24 minutes of serious storytelling, it becomes exhausting fast. The mood of the show whiplashes between tragedy, comedy, action, and fan service multiple times in an episode, with none of its elements being given the time they need to actually work. Blink and you'll miss 5 crucial plot details. Sneeze and when you look up, it'll be a totally different scene. And that's kind of a shame, because if you strip away that one glaring problem, the show has the potential to be a decently fun shonen fantasy romp. The music's used poorly, but some of the compositions are nice. The art direction looks really good in places when it pauses long enough for you to see it, and the animation isn't bad, which is more than I can say for the rest of the shows I'm about to slander. If this had been, say, a first season or even a 48-episode series, it might have been really good, but in its current form, I'd rather have nothing. I was more emotionally invested in reading the Wikipedia summary of the plot than I was in watching the episodes. Reading Wikipedia also causes problems for our 4th place entry, though for very different reasons. Ulysses, Jeanne d'Arc and the Alchemist Knight is a hilariously incompetent fantasy anime / weekly French lesson that tells the tale of how an alchemist named Montmorency saved France by making out with a 12-year-old girl a whole bunch to activate her superpowers. A premise that's already creepy enough before you look on Wikipedia and realize that Montmorency is based on the real-life Guy de Rais, or Bluebeard, who anime fans might recognize as the creepiest motherfucker of all the creepy motherfuckers stalkers in Fate Zero, and history buffs will know as an infamous pedophile and serial killer who raped and murdered nearly 200 children. I mean, say what you will about Caligula, but at least its hero wasn't actually, Caligula. Ulysses attempts to tell a tale of dark historical fantasy, and it manages to fail at the historical part in the first 2 minutes when a professor talking about the ongoing war between France and England says,
前世紀から隣国イングランドの侵略を受けておる。両国はわしが生まれた年から戦っておるから、もう80年近くになるかの。この戦争はいずれ歴史家たちに And
okay, I know that this is just the anime spelling out the precise time period for the slow kids in the back, but where the fuck is the old guy getting this information? What kind of extreme pessimist do you have to be to look at a war that's gone on this long and say, yeah, we're in for at least another 20 years of this, to a group of school children? Fuck. And the historical revisionism only gets worse from here. We soon learn that young Montmorency's group of friends at school coincidentally includes King Charles VII, Duke Arthur III of Brittany, and Duke Philip the Good of Burgundy, 3 significant figures in the story of Joan of Arc, who've all been reimagined as hot sword-fighting anime girls with huge titties. And the famous French mercenary Lerche gets to be an anime babe too, because why not? It worked for Fate. And yeah, if you are a Fate fan, this means that now there's one more buxom, blonde, blue-eyed Arthur who you have to keep straight in your head now. I am so sorry. Also, Montmorency's motivation in the story has been changed from ending the war for the sake of, putting a cap on 80 years of French suffering into making sure that all of his friends can be friends again after they raised the biggest flag in anime history.
Hey, we should swear an oath. A promise to stay friends forever.
That tangy stuff you're tasting right now is your own vomit. And if the fact that almost every single significant historical figure in this story just happened to go to the same fucking high school is too much of a coincidence for you, don't worry, because it only gets more contrived from here. For example, Montmorency makes a hobby of studying alchemy in his spare time and plays pretend that a random shiny rock he found in his parents' storehouse is actually the Philosopher's Stone. And it turns out he's right. In one episode, Ulysses manages to defy just about every rule of good storytelling, and it only gets more infuriating as it goes on. The characters are totally unbelievable, and its core hook is just gross. It also barely has an original thought in its head. Every concept in it is shamelessly ripped off from better anime, games, light novels, and manga, and while it's not quite as poorly paced as Hakyu, Hoshin, Engi, it manages to be just as confusingly plotted. I will say that the show at least has some decent character designs and animation, though the latter is pretty inconsistent, and it seems that they spent most of their frame budget on fan service and rare action scenes, but all of the characters are written in such an infuriating generic manner that they only manage to ruin their own good looks. Get past the atrocious writing and premise, and the most remarkable thing about this show is how fucking boring it is. As someone who really loves fantasy stories, historical fiction, and specifically alchemy, I was really looking forward to this show, and even after my initial disappointment with it, I was hoping it could at least be a guilty pleasure, but nothing about it is pleasant to watch, and honestly, I'd rather take part in the actual 100 Years' War. In third place, we have Shichisei no Subaru, or Seven Senses of the Reunion, a show so uninteresting that at 58 copies in 1 week, its first Blu-ray managed to claim the anime industry record for worst-selling Volume 1 of all time. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure Reunion fully deserves to be where it is on this list. While its fight animations are laughable and its writing is abysmal, if I were being totally objective about my rankings here, I'd have to concede that both the shows I've already talked about and a few of my runners-up are worse. But this one's personal, because Reunion shamelessly knocks off my favorite anime of all time, Anohana, and sullies almost everything that I love about it, not just through poor execution, but by using unholy alchemy to combine it with one of my least favorite anime of all time, Sword Art Online. Like Anohana, this story concerns 6 former childhood friends who spent the carefree days of their youth running Subaru, the top-ranked raid guild in the world's most competitive VR MMO, Union, a game so hardcore that when you die, you have to start from the beginning, and where players could acquire game-breaking abilities like mind-reading and future sight, called senses, by sheer luck. Because if there's one thing hardcore online gamers love, it's RNG. I guess that does explain how a crew of 7-year-olds managed to climb their way to the top of the leaderboards. Unfortunately for them, their success was a bit short-lived, as was Menma Asahi, a meek little girl with long white hair who died in the game and then died in real life, causing the whole thing to be shut down and her guildmates to split up. The group's leader, Haruto, becomes a reclusive NEET following her death, but finds a path to recovery when he unexpectedly runs into her again. Only she's not a ghost in the real world. Instead, Not Menma's player avatar is somehow still alive in the spiritual sequel to Union, which is called Reunion, because of course it fucking is, and now Not Jintan has to get the band back together in order to fulfill her last wish, and also to uncover the sinister conspiracy behind the game that led to their friend's death. Or did it? Yeah, as you might be able to guess, the tone of Anohana and SAO clash a little bit, and there are some problems that arise when you try to Frankenstein together 2 series that are this different. But there are more fundamental structural issues that arise in trying to combine these 2 stories. The drawn-out, arc-based structure of the light novel series essentially demands that a story develop its characters and central plot slowly, which means that clashes between ex-friends that were quick, raw, and emotional in Anohana get stretched well past their breaking point and riffed on until they lose all meaning here. Moreover, what was the emotional core of Anohana, Jintan's struggle to accept Menma's death and reconnect with his friends, is completely undermined by this show's attempts to create an underlying mystery. It's left ambiguous whether Not Menma is dead at all. The show heavily implies that she's actually stuck in a lab somewhere, so there may actually be no loss for Not Jintan to get over. And more importantly, everyone else can already see Not Menma from the start of the show, so there's no question as to whether Not Jintan is just seeing things, which in turn means that the squabbles Not Jintan gets into with his friends seem less like dramatic, life-changing milestones in a journey to come of age, and more like infuriating hormone-driven teenage bullshit. Maybe it's just me, but all the jealousy from Not Anaru and Not Yukiatsu seems a little, petty, considering that the childhood friend they thought was dead might actually be alive. Seems like the kind of thing that would motivate you to bury the hatchet, you know? Reunion is nothing but a hollow copy that completely fails to grasp the appeal or meaning of Anohana, and somehow it manages to make Sword Art Online look good by comparison too. The broken design of Alfheim looks like a goddamn Blizzard game next to Reunion's ludicrously imbalanced sense system, and even SAO's most absurd mustache-twirling villains had at least some semblance of coherent motivation. Sugo, yes, I'm using Oberon as a positive example here, kidnapped SAO players as lab rats for a secret mind control experiment, whereas the big bads of Reunion's first arc kidnap and try to enslave a teenage girl so that they can have the strongest guild in a video game. Way to rise up, gamers! And the really tragic part of all this is that Lerche could have easily come up with a more believable motivation for kidnapping if they just consulted the show's publicity producer, Kyo-Yo, who allegedly kidnapped an actual teenage girl while the show was airing. Given how mad this show makes me, you can only imagine how bad the next 2 anime had to be to top it. Our second place loser is a show so heinous that it managed to steal Master of Ragnarok's worst isekai crown just 1 season later. Conception. Because if there's one thing we can always count on to be worse than a half-assed light novel adaptation, it's a half-assed video game adaptation. I'm fairly certain that the original Conception game only exists because Danganronpa producer Yuichiro Saito took his hentai game pitch to Spike Chunsoft on a dare at the same time that the studio happened to be having a severe undetected gas leak. The project was immediately greenlit, Saito didn't object since he'd lose his bet if he backed down, and by the time the leak was fixed and everyone came to their senses, it was too far along for anyone to admit their mistake, and so a franchise was born. I have no proof that's how it actually went down, but if you can give me a better explanation for how there's a JRPG where a teenage boy with isekaitis has definitely not sex with his cousin and 11 other girls to create magic Muppet baby fate servants and save the world, I would love to hear it. This show is the epitome of unrealistic wish fulfillment. Not only is our incredibly generic hero tasked with saving the world by literally making babies with hot girls, I see you there, Shinzo Abe, but out of all of the fabled, destined baby daddy heroes in this world's history, this one is the most specialist one of all because he has the incredible, unique, legend, wait for it, dairy ability to have threesomes. I shit you not, that's actually his isekai superpower. Now, from that plot description, you might think that Conception the anime would at least be a wild, goofy, fun ride. And you might be right if even a single person working on it had actually wanted to make it. Sadly, Conception is not one of those anime that got made because a passionate director or producer loved the concept of the game and had a vision for a story they could tell with it. Rather, it was produced by lowest bidder Gonzo to tick a box on the marketing sheet for Conception Plus, the game's upcoming PS4 remastered edition. It really seems like no one who worked on this show gave a single shit about it. The majority of the runtime in each episode is dedicated to conversations depicted through static shots of characters, mostly off-model, with what little movement that does happen, excluding some tepid fan service, animated at between 6 and 8 frames per second. Some characters will just pop between keyframes with no in-betweens, and almost every animation, no matter how bad it is looped or repeated at least once. Half the time, that doesn't even include basic lip flaps, since the camera will often be very far away or pointed at any character aside from the one doing the talking, and the most talkative member of the cast is a magic raccoon whose lips don't even move. So a lot of the shots are just her grinning face pressed up against the camera, not moving at all for upwards of 30 seconds. It is embarrassingly bad. Those scenes are further marred by a terribly implemented recycled video game soundtrack and voiceover delivered with the kind of passion you only get when both your actors and your director have been at the studio for 6 hours and really just want to fucking go home already. The show's story skips over almost all of the dungeon crawling elements of Conception, you know, the parts that people actually liked, leaving only the light novel dating sim sections to be hodgepodged together into something resembling a harem comma. Well, a harem show. There is very little that's as painful to watch as bad comedy. When an action scene or moment of drama is bad, often you can at least laugh at it, but when a joke fails, there's nothing you can do but stare in stunned silence. And Conception is worse at landing its jokes than Joseph Joestar is at landing airplanes. Most of the show's humor can be summed up as talking raccoon says inappropriate thing, or talking raccoon does inappropriate thing. For instance, Protagonist Kun could be walking down the street and look at some weapons in a shop window, and then the raccoon will start jacking him off through his pants. And that's the whole joke. Look, I'm the kind of guy who actively enjoys Girls Bravo. It isn't that hard to make me laugh, but Conception couldn't even manage to do it once. And the romance elements are somehow even worse. They never really bother to establish any chemistry or a connection between Diet Kirito and the girls in the show, since they're all obligated to bang him to save the world anyway, so he mostly just shows up at their place of residence after stalking them for a bit and takes some bad advice from the rapist raccoon that leads to some absurd, contrived scenario where he gets to show off what a gosh darn nice guy he is, which invariably leads to sex. Sorry, to the love ritual, which is definitely not sex. You hear that, ratings board? This model of romance, where any girl who sees you being a decent human being for all of 10 seconds should immediately want to be with you, feels like it was ripped straight from the pages of AXiz. And that's kind of just the tip of the creepy iceberg. Like, one of the girl's routes involves kidnapping her and waiting for Stockholm Syndrome to set in, and they play that as kind of a joke, but then the girl realizing what a nice guy the dude holding her hostage actually is serves as the unironic emotional climax of the episode, and I really hope I don't have to explain what's wrong with that. The whole thing plays out like a nightmare version of the world God only knows, going by one girl per episode, written by a man whose every meal is slid under the door to his room by his mom, and whose last moment of human interaction was disputing a credit card charge to a porn site 6 months ago. It really wouldn't surprise me if every one of these episode scripts was submitted under the working title My Manifesto. It was only the occasional reminders that this show is a product of laziness, not psychopathy, like how the raccoon will routinely say, "If you want to know more, visit our website," instead of actually explaining how the show's world works, that prevented me from calling the police on it. And after the ending, where the talking raccoon magically turns into a human girl so that she can bang the hero, I'm not sure I made the right decision about that. Conception is a testament to what a group of people can really do when they all band together and collectively give up. A blatant advertisement that nobody wanted to make and fewer people wanted to watch, that can only hurt the sales of the remake it was pooped out to promote. And somehow, this year managed to produce something even worse than that. Before I can get to it though, I'd like to briefly insult some of the very deserving series that didn't quite make the list. Between the Sea and Sky is a terrible anime based on a gacha fishing game that somehow manages to run through every moe anime cliche you can possibly imagine without once making any of its girls seem cute or endearing. Lord of Vermilion, the Crimson King, is a card game advertisement with an apocalyptic setting that aims for a tone somewhere between Tokyo Ghoul and Shin Megami Tensei, but lands squarely in the territory of Birdemic. If you're looking for a so bad it's good hate watch, this is a good pick. Conversely, Rewrited, Derrida Who Leaps Through Time, a disappointing original work from the director of Steins Gate, is not a good hate watch. It's bad in an aggressively dull way that somehow manages to make time travel and the robot apocalypse feel boring, and I can only recommend it as a sleep aid. Same goes for, I think it's pronounced Merhen Maidhen, a magical girl show that was so boring that even the production team fell asleep 2 episodes before it was slated to end. But 2018's worst anime has all of them beat. My Sister, My Writer has the dubious distinction of being the single worst brother-sister incest anime I've ever seen, and yes, if you were somehow blissfully unaware, there are enough of those for it to count as its own genre. And this one makes Eromanga Sensei and Oremo seem like out-and-out masterpieces by comparison. I mean, it's not every day you see an anime's staff hide a cry for help in its end credits. The production of My Sister, My Writer has by all accounts been an absolute nightmare for everyone involved in it, and it shows in every frame of the animation. Characters spend more time off-model than on, with the series' art style noticeably changing in like every other shot. It kinda looks like what would happen if you used the front page of 2005 DeviantArt as a storyboard, only worse somehow. The anatomy and faces are so inconsistent that it looks like they had Picasso on keyframes. And this is a fan service anime, so that's suboptimal. This show is to regular ecchi what Eldritch texts are to self-help books. I'm pretty sure that if you tried using this for its intended purpose, your dong would come out the other end looking like a Junji Ito creation. But as bad as the artwork and animation and acting and music are, which is to say very, very bad, they've all got nothing on the script. My Sister, My Writer follows Yu Nagami, a high school-aged aspiring novelist whose sister, Suzuka, is secretly the greatest new writer in Japan, nay, the world. Under the pseudonym Chiaki Toano, Suzuka penned a light novel so impeccable and perfect that the whole world is in awe of her talents. That book was, of course, about a girl who's in love with her older brother, and Suzuka is constantly contriving excuses to put her brother in sexual situations for research, like, look at my panties so I can understand panty peek scenes. Yet somehow Yu never manages to put 2 and 2 together to get fucking yikes. This guy's so dense that all all the show's art mistakes could be chalked up to the light bending around him, but most of what I've complained about so far is well-worn ground. Absurdly talented younger sisters with stupidly obvious but unnoticed crushes on their siblings are par for the incest course, and while My Sister, My Writer provides particularly egregious examples of how bad those tropes can be, it's when we get into the specifics of its plot that it really starts to break down. The twist in the show's premise that makes it unique is that Suzuka is too shy to take the spotlight, so you must pretend to be Towa no Chiaki in her stead. This small deception creates many problems for him, mostly in the form of painfully unfunny and contrived misunderstandings that somehow always seem to be solved by getting sexual with his sister, but his biggest problem is definitely beautiful women constantly throwing themselves at him, ripping their clothes off, and repeatedly telling him that he's the greatest writer in the universe and that his prose makes Shakespeare look like a plebeian hack. Those women include the hottest girl in his school, who also happens to be the author of his favorite light novel series, his favorite voice actress who wants to play his little sister character in the anime and insists on calling him Oni-san in order to get into the role, and Ahegao Double Peace Sensei, the buxom illustrator of Suzuka's book, who literally puts his hands between her breasts before she's said 2 words to him. All of this reads as a pretext for the author to record his jerk-off fantasies directly onto the page with the flimsy excuse that it's not a Mary Sue because the main character's actually not the world's greatest writer. But the defense against that from fans of the books, because I can't imagine there are too many of the show, would be that it's all a parody of self-indulgent incest light novels intended to make fun of the genre's excesses. But there are 2 big problems with that. The first, and this isn't the fault of the source material, is that this adaptation is so poor in its execution that it's impossible to tell what's supposed to be a joke. When everyone dresses up in fetish costumes for you in order to help with his character design process, the show does nothing to indicate that the scene is meant to be taken as absurd or ludicrous, and nothing in it is outside the realm of what you'd expect to see in, well, any bad ecchi anime. And that's kind of the bigger problem with this approach to parody. Much like the awful tripping scene from Phantom World, where the joke is just that he grabs her ass instead of her boobs, at the end of the day, My Sister, My Writer is still indulging in everything that it's supposedly making fun of. Jokes or not, every plot point invariably leads to women getting naked for the enjoyment of the male audience. And going off the light novel's illustrations, which is all I can do until the books are properly translated, that very much seems to be the case there as well. And that's not good parody. It doesn't comment on the problems with the emoto subgenre, it just goes through the same cliched motions toward the same end under the guise that you're meant to laugh at it instead of, well, you know. It's trying to be trashy without being seen as trash, and I just hate that kind of dishonesty. Squicky as the likes of Eromanga Sensei and Kiss AXsiz can be, at least they embrace what they are and try to be the best version of it that they can be for the people who do like it. My Sister, My Writer, on the other hand, is a show for nobody. It's not confident enough in its own weird bullshit to be enjoyable for the people who are into it, and it's not self-aware enough to be funny for the people who aren't. I can envision a hypothetical individual who might enjoy even Conception, bad as it is, but I can't say the same for this turd. And that's why, in my opinion, it is the biggest mistake that anime made this year. But what do you guys think? What are the anime that you hated most this year? Were there any abominations that you'd put ahead of my choices? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're down there, well, you know what those buttons do. My list of the best OPs of 2018 is coming up next week, and right after that, we'll be jumping into the winter season. Until then, I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.